In order to learn more about human history, the genographic researchers study people's DNA. In collaboration with the indigenous Caribbean communities of both St. Vincent and Trinidad, they have learned quite a bit more about the first peoples of the Caribbean. And they are very much impacted on how the Africans impacted the Caribbean in a whole. Alright, welcome to another episode of An Exclusive on IKTV. I'm, of course, your host, Jerani Zilon Richardson. And the National Geographic's Genographic Project has returned to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And Dr. Theodore Shore and Dr. Jada Ben Torres. Did I get that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, in St. Vincent to continue their work on the Genographic Project. Dr. Ben Torres came to St. Vincent in 2012 and took DNA samples as part of this global research study. She visited various communities where a large number of our indigenous people reside to learn more about our history and heritage. Alright, so delving into Vincentian culture and lifestyle, my guests are, as you would have noticed, Dr. Torres and Dr. Shaw. Alright, it's a pleasure having you guys in the studio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Alright, so how are you guys doing today?
Good.
Very well.
Very well.
Okay, I must make a sad note that this is probably the last day in the country for you guys.
It is.
Even this afternoon.
But it's been a good trip. Very good trip. Yes.
Alright, so I'm gonna get to it. Alright, guys, so if, in case you haven't noticed, Dr. Jada and Dr. Shore. I need to find another way to get these names easier in my head. Okay, so tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Jada.
So I am a professor of anthropology at the University of Notre Dame. I've been there 6 years teaching anthropology. My specialty is genetic anthropology, so I'm interested in understanding human experience but using DNA as a means to make sense of that. My research interests primarily are in the Caribbean. I've got over 10 years of research experience within the region, which includes St. Vincent as well as many of the other English-speaking islands.
Okay, and Dr. Theodore.
Okay.
Is it okay if I call you guys like this?
That's fine.
Okay. I'm just trying to keep the name simple.
That's okay.
All right, go ahead.
Well, I'm a professor of anthropology at the University of Pennsylvania, and where I've been working for the past 13 years. And I have been involved in doing research into the questions about the peopling of the Americas for over 25 years. I've worked both in Russia and Siberia and in the Americas to try to find the connection between those areas and the dispersal patterns, the history of those two areas and their relationships, the peoples, indigenous peoples. And I became involved with the Genographic Project with its inception in 2005. So we've been working almost 10 years on this particular question, the history of the Americas as indigenous peoples and the relationships between people who live in different places within the Americas. But we're also able to begin to explore the questions that you raised, which is what happens when people from other places in the world come here to the Americas. What is the impact of European colonization, the impact of African diaspora, even recent immigration on the history of peoples and also their DNA that we were looking at to trace their ancestry to different parts of the world. So that's a major motivation for us being here and trying to explore, working with communities in St. Vincent, in Trinidad, in Puerto Rico to understand that Caribbean history more specifically.
Okay. Well, you see, in college, I did world history, and this is something I always wanted to. I need to go through and do some DNA testing to find exactly where I am from. So I'm guessing I probably missed my opportunity, seeing that this is the last day.
Well, we might be able to work something out.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess we're going to do that off air. That's
Exactly.
All right. Okay. So for those persons who didn't study history, you keep mentioning the Americas, and just to clear up the air, would you like to explain what you mean by the Americas?
So the Americas are basically everything that's in the Western Hemisphere. It's North America, Canada, the United States, Mexico, all of Mesoamerica, Central America, the Caribbean, and South America. So that geographic area has, in a very deep time sense, a common history, which makes it distinctive from other parts of the world, and hence its indigenous peoples share a deep common ancestry as well. Right. But since people came here 15 or 20,000 years ago, they moved into different places, occupied the Caribbean, occupied North America, the Arctic, down into Patagonia, and so forth. And as they've done that, they begin to differentiate from each other in terms of the language they speak, the cultures that they bear, the DNA patterns that they happen to have because of their own unique, distinct histories. And that's we're able to examine those in some detail by using DNA and then relating to what we find from the archaeological record, linguistics, archaeology, and historical records as well.
Okay, and Dr. Jada, in your studies so far, I'm be branching and jumping all over the place, right? Because we just want to just get a lot of information right now.
Sure.
And coming up to independence, this is the month of independence in St. Vincent. We celebrate on the 27th. So far since you're here in St. Vincent, what is the one thing that stood out to you? And I'm gonna ask you that. You see, I'm guessing I'm giving you time to think while I target Dr. Jada.
The one thing that
stood
out to me. People are very friendly here, but I generally see that along the Caribbean. But what stood out is just the beauty and the grace of the island, the way it's set up, the way the people are. I think what I'm most impressed about is how resilient the communities seem after. I heard about the hurricanes, I saw some of the destruction that caused, and I see, not everything's been repaired, but the communities are resilient, and I see a lot of working together, which is refreshing to see, because I know how devastating it was. So that has stood out, to me.
Okay, and Dr. Stroh.
Well, the word resilience actually came to mind to me as well, and much for many of the same reasons that Jada, Dr. Venturas had mentioned. Also, I think, and this was actually commented on by one of the persons I was speaking about, was that for a small island, St. Vincent has a lot of history. Both a very deep history as well as a very complex, more recent history over the past number of centuries. And the intersection of great powers and the struggle for influence over this area and other sorts of world events. And so that actually is quite interesting, and I think it's led us both to try to find additional information about that history from documentary sources, from interviews with other people, and of course using the tools that we come with as anthropologists to understand that history a little bit better.
Okay, and for those looking on, I'm gonna keep interchanging between you two. For those looking on, tell us, what exactly is anthropology?
So anthropology is the study of humankind. What can we learn about the human experience? How do our cultures, our language, even our biology, how does that shape the experience of being human? And there's many ways to be human, number one, and many ways to study that. We, in particular, are focused on genetic work, but there are others that focus on material culture. So we've got archaeologists, right? And linguistics, as you mentioned before, we also use information from them to make sense of the genetic data. So linguistic anthropologists, and then cultural anthropologists, whose focus really is just on culture, understanding different worldviews.
Okay, so so far, right, so since you were here in St. Vincent, after you've returned, you have gone to Rosebank and Sandy Bay. You set up points in Kingston, and you did your research, and you extended back, you give back your results from your DNA test. What have you learned from these two areas in specific so far?
Well, first I'd want to thank our collaborators here on the ground, because without them, none of this would have happened. So both the National Cultural Foundation as well as the Garifuna Heritage Foundation, and then our collaborators in the northern communities have been pivotal in getting this work done. So obviously we are very grateful for their support of the project. We've learned a lot so far from having done this project. So if we combine the data that we've gathered here as well as from the community in Trinidad, the Santa Rosa's First Peoples community of Arima, we looked at two very specific regions in the genome. So one part we traced the maternal ancestry. So a portion of the DNA that a person inherits from their mother, she got it from her mother, she got it from her mother. So when we look at that, it shoots back in time, and it tells us about just that maternal line, that mother's 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 mother. Okay? If you're a male, we can also look at your Y chromosome, and that's the part of your DNA that makes men male, and it's inherited from father to son. So when we look at it, we can look at a man, we'll learn about his father's father's father, back in time. Right? So these
genetic genealogy.
Exactly, right. So these portions of the DNA give us a snapshot of someone's ancestry. It's not an entire picture, but just a snapshot about their mother's 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 line and their father's 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 line. So when we did that in the indigenous communities in Trinidad and St. Vincent, roughly half, right under half, about 43% had indigenous matrilines. So they belong to genetic families that come through the mother that trace to the Americas. They are descendants of the very first peoples that inhabited the American continent. Okay. When we looked at the Y chromosome, we found some really surprising things. What was really surprising is that we found about a third of the men in the study could trace their ancestry to indigenous men. And what was so surprising about that is up until our research, we looked at the literature, we looked at all the previous data, that had never been reported before. Everyone had commonly assumed that the native men were either all killed or for whatever reason marginalized and didn't leave descendants. But that's not the case because we detected among some of the men in these indigenous communities.
So I'm guessing that's a falls within Eurocentric history?
Perhaps that, but I think that in some ways the question was never really fully explored. There were a lot of assumptions made about what took place with contact with Europeans and the decimation of communities here through war and disease, and then enslavement of native peoples, and then with the African diaspora bringing people from other places, also may have led to intermixing of peoples such that the indigenous men's contributions to these generations along the Y chromosome was simply swamped out or lost. And in fact, that doesn't. But other people have also worked with communities on these islands that have, including Dr. Bentor's worked mostly for the mitochondrial lineages, the maternal lines, but no one had systematically looked for these sorts of lineages in other places in the Caribbean area until very recently. And so that's why it's really novel, working with indigenous communities and not just broad surveys of diversity across the islands, which is not focused on self-identifying Garifuna, Kalinaga, Taino populations from maroon populations from different places around the Caribbean.
Okay. So this question just popped up in my mind, and I'm trying to figure it out. Did your quest for the Caribbean and studying the Caribbean, would it have in any way relation to Ivan Van Sertima's literature that came before Columbus?
So I've actually read bits of that book. Many of my archaeological colleagues are not as confident in that book about the evidence that he brings. But what's undeniable is that African peoples have had a huge impact, culturally, linguistically, genetically, on the Caribbean. And in terms of when it came or when it happened, that's more up for debate.
Okay, because I remember in history class, every time someone raises a point on Ivan Van Sertima's book, that would take up the entire class. I mean, it diverts from everything, and it would just be arguments after arguments. It's like, this theory can't be possible, and there's like a whole lot of arguments behind it. So then when I heard, okay, you're doing DNA traces, I wonder if this is going to discredit or actually give him some credit.
Well, I would say that based on what we know, our ability to reconstruct these genealogical lineages, genetic lineages in contemporary peoples of the Caribbean, and then comparing it to DNA that you can extract from the bones of peoples who lived here before, the Taino, the Siboney, the Kalinaga, and other places in the Caribbean, we don't see lineages which come from Africa or other places other than the Americas in the DNA of those ancient individuals. Now that's also a partial picture of that history, but at least as far as we have with regard to a past and a past reference in a present day population, we don't see significant any African influence on the initial settlers of this region, or actually anywhere in the Americas for that matter.
Okay, I'm guessing, I'm hoping that there are persons who's doing history in college. I'll probably just give you an essay topic to write on. We'll just give you something.
There is.
You should listen to him.
All right. Okay. So I'm gonna take another branch out from outside of everything here. Your collaborators were in St. Vincent here were at the Garifuna Foundation also, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what would you say to persons who are still having a bit of a battle in their mind in accepting Garifuna heritage? Seeing that you've been working along with them, you must have some information that a lot of us don't have. I'm beating you guys a lot, huh?
These are
Well, my introduction to this history, the Garifuna history, actually came through reading some of the original literature on the ideas about who the Garifuna were, what their history was, and drawing upon the historical record, and then coming to some earlier genetic research, which is attempting to test these ideas about connections between Honduras, Belize, and so forth, and other places like St. Vincent, and so I actually have been curious about this for quite some time. And the early genetic information suggested an African influence, but yet also an indigenous connection to other parts of the Caribbean. So we are, in some sense, building on at least a modest genetic record or biological record that helps to elaborate that story, which has largely been told from historical documentation, oral histories, other information of that kind. So Garifuna, I think we understand to be a term, although it can be interpreted differently, that's basically represents people who are a blend of African and Native American ancestry and culture and heritage. And it represents sort of a historical moment of contact between those persons, between the original Caribbean inhabitants and people who come from Africa to this area, and then that giving rise to sort of a new kind of people, if you will. And so that story has always been written in sort of a one-sided way. What we're attempting to do is add some details and nuance and complexity and sophistication to that story, which helps to in some ways test ideas that were brought from the historical record, or even add new details which people didn't know before.
Okay, so I'm hoping that this is going to inspire people into looking more into the Garifuna. That's what I'm trying to say. It might seem like I'm battering you.
No, I would add is that the fact that you are here today is really a testament to the survival of your ancestors. All right, you're here because they lived, and I think that's worth investigating, learning more about. Honor them by acknowledging maybe, yes, I'm from this community or I'm from that community. It's nothing to fear, but instead might be something worth investigating, learning more about. You may be surprised. As Tad mentioned, it's a one-sided history. So by investigating, asking those questions, you can provide another perspective, one that may look very different, one that you might actually be very proud of, but you might never know unless you explore it.
And do some serious investigation.
Right.
I'm guessing we're going to need another something like that, because we got to delve a bit deeper into Vincentian culture. Okay, so Dr. Ben, you said that one of the things that caused you, which is something general for the Caribbean, is that the people are friendly. So in collecting your samples for research, did you just have persons volunteer, or you had to go and ask persons to do it? Were they just willing to say, oh sure, I'll take my DNA?
No, so these studies actually are done in a very careful way. We get permissions at our own universities here locally with ministries of health, and then with local communities, and then individually. So I always ask, people, do you want to participate? I have to explain the study. These things take time. There are some people who are more comfortable with the idea, and there's others who are not, but ultimately it is a choice to volunteer, and I always want to respect people's wishes, whether they want to participate or not.
Okay, and Doctor, you have the same experience, correct?
Well, yes, it's basically we're working within communities who have, in a collective sense, an interest in these same questions about history and heritage, and individuals there who also are wanting to participate and learn more about their own history and heritage and how they might be connected to other peoples around the world. Okay. But we do spend a lot of time explaining the project, talking, getting permissions, and so forth. And while this is sometimes a long and difficult and detailed process, ultimately what it means is everybody is better informed about how the work is carried out, what they can expect from their experience with us, what the results that they'll get as a byproduct of their participation will be, and then to also give them the confidence that they can contact us later and ask us about questions, and we'll respond to them. So we're trying very hard to be available to our participants and to explain results. We've come back and actually given the results to nearly everyone who's been here, and only because we've missed a few people, we've been able to hand them out in person. So this is something that we're both obligated to do, but we actually want to do, because the process of engagement with everybody allows us to learn so much more than simply taking anonymous DNA samples and then doing the analysis of them. It's the human dimension of the work, which is actually most important. I think we both enjoy that part of the research very, very much.
Okay, so today's Monday. For those of you who are watching, this is not going to be aired until Tuesday, which is the first airing. But today you did some research. Are the results already out, or you're still waiting them?
No, you have to wait on them. So we just have the samples. There is a long process to the actual analysis. They'll come back to our labs. Then we have to, from the swabs that we collect, we have to extract the DNA. Once that's done, there's a series of other things we need to do to prepare the sample for analysis. And then there's the analysis. And then after the analysis, another analysis. It's actually the statistical analysis where we can provide summary statistics and sort of make sense of it. And then I would say we sit down and we think about this data in the context of local histories, community histories, and whatever else we know. So it takes time.
Okay, so roughly estimate how long does it take?
What do you think?
Well, the process that you've just laid out could take anywhere from 5 to 8 months. I mean, maybe a little bit longer if we're summarizing the data for a paper, a scientific report that we'll publish to make it publicly available. So we try to do the work as fast as possible so that the participants themselves can have access to their own results before we actually are summarizing and doing a very, more sophisticated statistical analysis. But anything that we do summarize, that we publish, we also make available to all the participants so they can see what they will get their own results individually, but they'll also have an idea about how their contribution to this larger story actually came about and what we've been able to put together.
Right.
So we try within a matter of several months to have the first set of results available and then subsequently work on the next set of the DNA analysis and the next set. And each time we have new information, we make it available to our participants in electronic form and then as best as possible come to all communities and hand the results back to persons in person. So through electronic means for those who are computer savvy and then and then also in person, everyone receives their results, or even by mail, ultimately be able to see what we found.
Okay, so when are you guys planning to return to St. Vincent?
So the Garifuna Heritage Foundation is hosting a conference in March, so we're planning on submitting an abstract and presenting a paper there.
Okay, so I'm guessing I need to go and look for some information on that also. See, I'm keep trying to push Vincentian out so that persons can more embrace the culture more. Yeah, I mean, now we're coming up closer to independence. We're going to be seeing a lot on social media, Vinci to the bone, and you know, a lot of people rep St. Vincent, but they're repping something that some persons don't have a lot of information on about themselves.
Okay.
So I'm trying to push this.
Very good.
Okay, so we're getting close to the end of this program. So before we go any further, is there anything you want to say? Any independence, something for the people?
Well, there's two things in that case. I'll start with the first. With regard to the study, this is a genetic genealogy study. It's not a medical study. We don't do paternity tests or anything like that. And we work very hard to maintain people's privacy in terms of their genetic information and the results of the study connected to their name. So we actually go through a series, sort of a different series of things to do that. But I want to ensure that anybody that participates in the study, it's not a medical study. We're not looking into anybody's medical history or asking questions about illness or disease. And then, we have unique ID numbers that people are assigned that separates their genetic sample from their name, their identifying information. And these are some of the things we do that are very important that people know. That it's part of our study, and again, the idea is to get good information, but at the same time protect the privacy of all of our participants.
Okay, before you go on, you just popped another question in my head. Okay, so what if, say, you're going through somebody's DNA and say they have some cure for AIDS or cancer? What are you going to do about it?
I would never know, because that's not what I'm looking in the genome for. I'm looking at genetic ancestry. Right. There's only very specific markers that we're looking. It's not medical research. So if they do have it, I won't be the one to find it.
Oh, that is sad.
Well,
that is so sad.
I should have been a different researcher then.
Yes, and in fact, we are constrained in terms of the fact we can't do medical research, but the methodologies that we're using, the methods of analyzing the DNA, wouldn't allow us to see those kinds of things. So we won't be the people who actually make those kinds of discoveries.
Okay, and your independence message to them?
Congratulations, I think it's wonderful. I think that's wonderful, congratulations. I'm just excited to be part of this and to celebrate with Vincentians.
And same sentiments?
I would say the same thing. I'm impressed by the history and diversity of people here, and their enthusiasm for their history and culture, and it's something that's very much worth celebrating.
Vinci to the bone.
Exactly.
All right. So this question that I chose to everyone who comes on the set as our closing set question. After this interview, after you've done your researches, after you've found your results, after everything is done, how do you want to be remembered? And I'm going to start with you, Dr. Jada Ben Torres.
Okay. Well, I'd say on a personal level, I would want to be remembered as a good wife, good mother, good family person. From a professional level, I think I'd want to be most remembered for the work I've done in terms of understanding my own Caribbean identity and the Caribbean history in general. Another thing I'd want to be remembered for would be the insights, hopefully, that I'll one day make in understanding the relationship between race, disease disparity, and I suppose the word to use is identity.
Okay, hold on, no, Doctor, 1 minute. I just picked up something. You said my own Caribbean history.
I did say that. So even though I was born in the United States, both my parents are from Trinidad. My father's from San Fernando, and my mother from the Port of Spain area.
So I'm guessing this is why the interest in the Caribbean.
It started there. Yeah.
Okay, and Dr. Theodore Shore. Same thing. After this interview, after you've done all your research, your professors, and after you've done your teachings, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, I would say that one way would be that I was a good mentor of students and somebody who could shape the minds of people to think in different kinds of ways, to see the world using genetics or other means, but to be able to take the field forward that we work in, to try to ask interesting questions, to try to help them with their careers and to help them be the leaders in the research areas that we're in. We all, not only do we have a genetic genealogies, we also have our own academic genealogies and basically our academic children. And they, in some sense, are a legacy of the work we carry out and how we try to think about the world and how they act, what we've imparted to them as scholars. So I would like to think that I would be, to some extent, like Jada, a good parent, if you will, of these academic children, and that they actually are able to do new things and be intellectually curious and to advance the field in various ways. From my own professional life, I would like to be known as someone, and to some extent I suppose I am already, but who's led us to think about new ways of viewing the world through genetics, and especially the history of indigenous people in this part of the world. It's been a long interest of mine, and I've dedicated my entire career to that. So I would like to think that I've actually been able to add something to that story and open some new doors for people to explore these ideas that we've been actually talking about here on this program.
Okay, and how satisfied are you so far with your research?
I feel like I'm just getting going. There's so many more questions, people to meet, things to study. So far I'm satisfied, but it's not enough yet. I'm not content, let's put it that way.
Okay, and you, sir?
Well, when I think about how much we've accomplished together, and also in other research that's related to the peopling of the Americas, I reflect on the fact that these same questions were asked centuries ago. And in some sense, we're just coming back to them using a different kind of perspective or a different kind of set of tools.
Right.
So we are really building on the work of many, many people, and but also contributing our own particular unique perspective to that. So that's somewhat humbling, but also it makes you feel good about what you're doing, that you are allowing people to learn new things, and then that there are new doors, new paths to follow, and the work allows people to do those new kinds of research and new kinds of inquiry.
All right. Okay, so guys, we're at the end. All right, but I wrote up a little intro. I'm reading. You mind if I read a little intro? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so here we go. Genographic project research suggests a South American origin for indigenous Caribbean peoples and possibly all connections to Central American populations. Furthermore, the genetic data from the indigenous communities of St. Vincent and Trinidad also support the notion that prior to European contact, the Caribbean was home for a wide variety of indigenous people, and I'm guessing this is something that you have definitely found in your research so far. again, for you historians, this is not necessarily in support of Ivan Van Sertima's theory they came before Columbus, which, by the way, I have a little kind of comments on that. So, yeah, you can pick that up for your history. I'm guessing the history lectures at the community college is going to feel good that, yes, my students are going to have good essays for me, hopefully. Right?
Hope so.
Okay, so this has been another episode of An Exclusive on IQTV. I am, of course, your host, Jeremy Zilon Richardson, and my guests were Dr. Jada Ben Thoris, and it was a pleasure having you in studio.
Thank you.
And Dr. Theodore Shore. All right, and it was a pleasure having you guys.
Thank you very much.
We hope we are going to be looking forward to these results and hearing more about who we are as Vincentians and where we came from. And I'm going to extend this courtesy on behalf of Vincentians. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you very much.
All right, guys, until we see you again, you're watching IQTV. Stay tuned.
And I love the way that it makes me feel. And if I am a reflection of him, then I must be fly, because his light, it shines so bright. I wanna lie.